And that would actually allow you to do, generally a full facade with the porch here, and then build a wing to the rear setback, and you might have space to do a ring on the side. So, but generally we were sort of trending towards this idea of reducing the mass of the houses.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to begin calling folks up, and I'm going to begin with Christian and Brent.
Okay, thank you, David. We have a few slides that we wanted to use to support our comments tonight. Brent and I are co-presenting here as co-founders of Good Growth San Carlos. Oh, you need the mouse?
I can pull up your presentation.
While that's coming up, I would also mention that I, for the past 12 months, have served on the Single Family Home Advisory Committee, which is the 7 residents convened to provide the city with input on the process. I think it's worth mentioning in this forum that we are an advisory committee and that the recommendations did not necessarily come from the SHAC. They were produced by the city in consultation with the consultant, and we provided comments on it, responses to it, but the intent was for a minority of the people to be part of that body, to be not involved in any way with real estate as an industry. And then, so a minority would have expertise that they could share. The majority was intended to be people with just garden variety homeowners in San Carlos. So I would say that, to say this, if you're going to continue to say the SHAC recommended this or that, I would point out that the recommendations were not unanimous. I thought there were a lot of good ideas that came out of the process. I was encouraged by it, but at the end of the day, you need to add those up to say, what do the standards, proposed standards allow? And so I was a dissenting vote on the package. I think we'll be making the case now that although there are good ideas and good work has been done, we're not convinced that these solve the problem in a meaningful way that we need to get to. We're hopeful that we can make some changes and potentially some additions to this that would get us there. So that's a little bit of a preamble. Pardon? Oh, is this, will this allow me to? Okay, not going to spend time here. This is who we are as Good Growth San Carlos and what we're working for. If you're interested in more information from this residence-based organization, you could find it at this particular URL. To refocus everyone on really how we got here and what we, why are we here? What are the problems we're trying to solve as a community here? Residents were raising issues associated with lot splits and oversized homes, primarily being the impact it had on individuals' privacy, their access to sunshine, and you hear some examples of that here today, and also just air circulation, openness. And lastly, and secondly, character and coherence of the neighborhoods, and some people shorthand that and say charm or just what the city looks like. Now, the reason we're focusing on it is not 7 key issues associated with mass, size, and height. Ultimately, the reason we're here is because those things are of concern because of the impact they have or don't have on individuals. And one resident I know who will be making a comment tonight who's had immediate experience with that is Bill Harcola, and I'll let him speak for himself. So.
Yeah, so in terms of the work that's been done, we tried to boil it down to, pretty simple questions in terms of taking a look. Because in my view, and I know Christian and others' view, there has been a lot of good work that's been done over the last 12 to 18 months on this topic, and we really appreciate the city's seriousness in terms of taking a look at this. From a resident's perspective, at the end of the day, though, I think the question comes down to, are these recommendations meaningful, a meaningful improvement in that sense, right? And more so, how do we know? Some of the information that was presented tonight showed some examples. Some of these examples seem to be more hypothetical or theoretical, and rather than in terms of having been looked at against the last 5 years of what's been built, and would that have actually had any sort of meaningful change in terms of those structures? And then finally, of course, should the city implement these? even if these don't go as far as perhaps some of us think that they should go, does that mean that they shouldn't necessarily be put in place? And of course, that echoes a lot of the comments that have already been made tonight as well. As it relates to what citizens want in terms of San Carlos, we go back and look at the survey that the city did 2 years ago now, June of 2016. I think this is the only example of sort of quantitative input that we've seen, and we realize that this was not necessarily couched as a scientific study, but I do think it is a good sort of pulse or just a litmus test to take a look at in terms of 78% of the residents, 180 residents filled out and responded to this survey. 78% when asked about house size and as it relates to being more restrictive or less restrictive, 78% said about the same or more restrictive in terms of San Carlos standards. So I think that's a pretty clear indicator, even with a pretty broad margin of error, that there is overwhelming support for smaller homes, or at least standards that are in line with other nearby cities on the peninsula. And so the question then comes to, okay, well, so what does that mean? We heard some information tonight in terms of comparisons as it relates to lot area ratio, where other cities along the peninsula have about 50%. What does it mean in terms of some of the other metrics? And Christian, I know you've done more analysis on this.
Thanks. I had neglected to add that I'm also highly encouraged that, that we're here 2 years ago, this was a problem, and now we're having a very substantive discussion about it. So I also feel very good about the effort that's being made. I'd like to make sure that there's the city's residents' concerns are addressed, but I think we can get to a good outcome. I would also know, most of you know me by now, I've been at just about every one of these meetings for the past 2 years. I would also point out that I think I was one of 2 SHAC members at the initial public hearing, and I think I'm the only one here tonight to follow up, so just an observation. Okay, so you've probably all seen one version or another of this graph in the past 2 years. We've updated it. What it shows is the proposed house size and maximum house size in San Carlos as it compares to 6 other cities that we think are good comparables up and down the peninsula. And so the comparison we'd like to direct your attention to is comparing the San Carlos house maximum to the median of these 6 other cities. So on a 5,000 square foot lot, the proposal suggests that someone could build essentially a 2,700 square foot house, which is the median in other cities. San Carlos is suggesting that on a 5,000 square foot lot, the maximum house could be in excess of 3,600 square feet. I'd point out that the red bars are where we are today, which are exceedingly out of line with other cities on the peninsula. The more salmon-colored bars are what the proposal is. So the fact that we've decreased the theoretical maximum to something less than what it was is not enough for me to feel comfortable as a resident that we've solved the problem. If we look at 6,000 square feet, the median household size in 6 other cities is 3,100. In San Carlos, the proposed house size is 4,500. That's about, that's probably getting close to the 45% larger than our peers. And if we look at 7,000 square feet, this is actually understated based on the city's data. The median in the other cities is allowing a house of 3,600 square feet, whereas in San Carlos, the proposed maximum house is 51. So these are obviously nowhere near comparable or less restricted than other communities. And so this is a real cause for concern and leads me to wonder, when residents by a 3-to-1 margin are saying they'd like to see something more conservative, how we got here. So here's our position. We're going to state why we think these aren't yet a solution to the issue and not a meaningful improvement. We're going to close with some recommendations that we think the city could adopt that would help move us in that direction. So to begin with, as Brent said up front, our conclusion is that these are not yet, unfortunately, a meaningful improvement because of maximum house size, which is 35 to 45% larger than 6 peer cities up and down the peninsula. The second story setback in the recommendations has gone from 9 feet down to 5 feet. That means that you can put a 2-story wall 5 feet from the property line next to your neighbor, and that's a reduction. So quantitative, we look at that and say that's a concern. There are no explicit protections of light and privacy. David, I would take some I would question the notion that other cities don't do it, or at least let's put it this way. We'll see that 4 of the 6 cities to which we're comparing ourselves have implemented a daylight standard to provide people with some form of protections to light and privacy.
But does it actually do it?
I think what happens is it enforces a larger setback, and that in itself typically does improve people's access to sun and sky and to privacy. So to wrap up, the design review process is as important as the standards because a lot of people feel it's a rubber stamp. And then we've got local architects who've spoken up and said that they don't believe that the proposed standards will reduce house size. So those are 5 reasons we feel this is not a meaningful solution to the problem. And I'll close with what we suggest. First of all, we think the city should test these standards out before they're implemented and impact the entire city. That could be done by taking 6 houses that in the last 3 to 4 years have generated the most complaints and concerns, actually try to apply the proposed standards on those houses and see if it would have made a difference. No one's getting close to the theoretical maximums in San Carlos today because they're so out of line. The second is we've got a consultant that we've paid to assist us in this process, mine them for additional ideas about how to address these concerns in a way that's consistent with the form-based standards they've suggested. And lastly, evaluate a broad range of complementary options and don't preemptively rule out solutions such as a complementary FAR limit or a daylight plane. We're not saying throw out all the good work on form-based standards, but why couldn't we use a FAR table to do 2 things? 1, set a limit on the size. 2, allow people to know what they can build, which is a common desire. And daylight plane is something that measures directly, without posing additional restrictions, those things that are of most concern. So we hope you'll consider these recommendations as a way to move forward, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. And just to be clear, what I was saying that cities don't have are view protections and sun protections. I mean, a daylight plane to me really doesn't, I mean, in all frankness, doesn't really do anything to protect against what I'm seeing in the letters of what people are concerned about. They're like, I'm losing my view, or I don't get midday sun anymore. And I am not by any stretch of the imagination saying that those are not significant impacts on people. I'm just saying that in my review of literature, and I recommend that anyone who likes to Google California view protection and you'll see what I'm talking about. There aren't protections like they're out there with some very small exceptions like
This is not mostly about views. I think by far the broader issues are privacy and access to sunlight. So I think from our perspective, even though I think happy to discuss the view issue at another time, I think the issue is even for people on the flats, can they still get sunshine in their yard and into their dining room?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can see the city can give us information on that, but I don't think a daylight plane is going to impact that. But you could be right and I could be wrong.
I think it's another way of getting to setbacks. But so, any other questions for Brent and me? Thank you for your time.
Sir, you have a question for them?
Yes.
So, do I have a speaker slip for you?
No. Do I need to fill one up?
You don't need to, but it's helpful, and
I can take it later too.
that's fine. So if you gentlemen don't mind, I know you need to go, but if you don't mind sitting for a second, if you want to come up real quick and ask your question, you can.
I'll just go back one on slide. The last bullet point makes an assumption that this will not reduce the house size. And you also mentioned that we are not building all the houses to the maximum size. So if you're not building a house to the maximum size, and it won't reduce the house size anyways, right? So it's kind of a null point. It doesn't prove anything.
I think we began by saying residents' concerned were with privacy, light, and air, and with the character and coherence.
I'm with you on that.
Okay, and with the character and coherence of the city. Our position is that the current standards are so out of line that even when you reduce them by 20% or 20%, 25% is done, no one was building at the theoretical limits of the standards. Most of the homes that are objectionable come in at lower, if you will, floor area ratios.
I understand, but where the data is coming from? What's the basis of that data? Is it a presumption?
So,
is it
So
an
he, you know,
opinion?
he just like you, sir. He's just a citizen, and yeah, so he's just giving his view of
Thank
things.
you.
But thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. All right. So as I indicated, thank you both of you, and obviously Christian, well, both of you. I know that you've put an enormous amount of time into that, and it's worthy of acknowledgement. So thank you. So I'm going to start calling people up again. If you can keep it to 2 minutes, fantastic. If you can't, I understand. We'll do the best we can. And I'm going to start with Ms. Kinsella, if she's still here. She had to leave. Okay. Well, if anyone sees her, you can tell her I called her first because of it. Lenore Matos. Linda, I'm so sorry. Your handwriting is great. My reading is not so.
So good evening, council members and neighbors. I thought I'd like to point out to all of you that this discussion actually was started in March of 2015. You can access your emails because I sent you the original letter. Unfortunately, health concerns knocked me off my feet. Thank you, Christian, for picking up the ball and making a touchdown with it. But what I'm here to point out is that, as Christian stated, this is not okay, and I believe you can do better. We're discussing garage sizes, we're discussing aesthetics. I'm gonna out myself. I own an architectural firm for 18 years, 30 years experience. So I get all this stuff, but I work from the heart, and I think mostly what a lot of these people are addressing is the compatibility issue. We're dealing with lack of privacy, we are dealing with lack of sunshine, and we're having people build their houses up to the maximum amount they can. My neighbor is subject to this. She has a dryer vent blowing into her house from a second-story house. It doesn't need to be there. There's an air conditioning unit that's blowing into the next neighbor's house. So the whole reason that I'm now here is because the lot next to me at 870 Sunset Drive has a proposal or hopes to put up 2 McMansions on the lot. This will greatly impact my sunshine, my privacy, my views. Okay, so that's not a subject of discussion, but my privacy is, I already have a house 3 stories up that can now look into my bedroom window. I have to keep my curtains closed all the time because I have no more privacy. It's gone. So I sent you the original email because I wanted to point out the fact that I don't see any changes, but I do see momentum, and I'm hopeful that you can continue this momentum because privacy is a concern. Compatibility is a concern. Sunlight, it is a concern. I'm sorry. Some of us have our solar roofs that are now being shadowed, and they're of no use any further. So I would like to point out again, I started this process in 2015. Check your emails. You'll see that I've had these discussions with you, and it's taken 3 years to get this momentum going. Please, let's continue this discussion and think about the compatibility of shoving a 2-story-foot home on either side of single-story homes. This house has no privacy. This house don't have privacy. I'm 3 houses down. I have no privacy.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, you seem like, with your experience, for me, it's like I hear people say, I want more privacy, and I mean, that's a totally legitimate thing to say, but what we need to do is either approve or not approve actual standards.
Privacy out of the
and you seem
discussion.
like someone who, no, I'm saying, it would be more helpful to me is if you sat down with your experience and you said, I would like to see X, Y, and Z in the standards. Okay, I mean, I don't have it in front of me right now, but I'm just telling you what's helpful to me.
What's helpful to us is compatibility. I can't understand why we're shoving 2-story homes next to 1-story homes. And then being told that we have the right to go up a 2nd story, but we don't want to.
So basically what you are advocating is that 2nd-story homes can't go next to 1st-story homes.
I
Is
think
that?
compatibility, and within a neighborhood, we should be considering that these are all single-story homes, and all of a sudden you're shoving in a 2-story home and expecting that house to go higher because they need to be able to go higher, and the one next door to it to go higher.
Okay.
No, single story, single story, single story. Don't shove in a 2-story home next to us.
Okay. Bill Harkala?
Good evening. I've been a San Carlos resident for 17 years and live on a corner property in Burton Park. In 2010, I completed an addition remodel. The large part of the project was to capture the winter sun. We used to have a sun porch out there, little metal roofed, screened-in thing. And in the wintertime, it was amazing with the plastic that went over the screen. It was really warm, really nice. So we moved our kitchen and dining room area into that place, and it was wonderful. I also live next door to a soon-to-be-completed massive 2-story addition remodel project. This project now shades my house from November to March. No more winter sun, forever shaded for me and anyone else who owns this property. And I'd like to make some points about this. The current city standards in the RDRC failed to protect my right to light. If San Carlos had a daylight plane similar to Palo Alto, which can be looked up, and it's 10 foot at the property line on a 45-degree angle, this line right here would demonstrate, and that's a side yard from the side yard property line, that I would have had, I calculate, 2 more months of that 4 months of sunlight on my property. That's significant in my case. The RDC also approved a project that exceeded the maximum lot coverage by 312 square feet with no justification other than planning recommended approval. No explanation was offered. No RDRC challenge was rendered. I want to furthermore say that the city development process from planning to building failed to ensure that the requirements to develop this egregious structure were met. This project, its excessive 2nd-story massing, allowing a 1-car garage, and building on non-complying setbacks, not requiring a property survey, all hinged on one requirement: to keep 50% of the existing walls and 50% of the existing roof. It is plainly evident on this document that was the staff recommendation report that clearly states that the existing small second story on this house was 437 square feet is to be removed. And subsequently a 1,321 square feet addition to be put up. Clearly demonstrates on this document that with the dotted lines here, that entire new roof structure is above the old roof structure. Now you could tell me, how can you save 50% of the existing roof and do this? This whole project with its non-complying front garage, single-car garage, in the non-complying setback, and I contend that the side yard setback on my side is less than 5 feet, and now I got a massive house with huge overhangs. I don't know if San Carlos has an overhang standard, but that's another issue. Again, so let me continue on with this.
If you could wrap up your comments, sir.
So I would like to conclude that planning and building process to ensure compliance needs to ensure compliance to the 50% existing demolition rule is broken. I'd like to state that it's broken. And I actually did go to planning about it, and I have other information. I have letters. I went to the RDRC. I tried to affect my, this as much as I could. And how it got out of planning is beyond me, but planning relied on building to catch this, and building did not. And I don't know how it got out of plan check based on this. I'm truly miffed. But anyway, it did. And then when I saw the whole roof being demoed and I asked planning about it, it said, if you have a reason to believe that more than 50% has been removed, you can come take a look at the building set of plans. There is a demo plan in there with highlighted walls the property owner and contractor agreed to keep. Please follow the attached instructions on how to request the building set of plans. I followed through with that. I never got a reply.
So it's been about 5 minutes. If you could make your closing comments.
I think there needs to be proof of hardship to justify the maximum lot coverage. And there needs to be a daylight plane standard to protect San Carlos residents' right to light.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Next up, Mr. Sherba.
I'm here to voice my opposition to the proposed changes. They're too lenient by not protecting residents in the loss of privacy, sunlight, and the quiet enjoyment of our properties. The commissioner asked for some specifics, which I jotted down during tonight's presentations. We still have an overwhelming 28-foot height maximum on two-story structures, no changes on those. That's an issue with me. The garage proposals seem to encourage second stories, and I think one of the parts of the presentation was to incentivize single-story construction. That I would be most open to, although there were no specifics in the presentation. I'm also taking exception to the reduced setbacks from 9 feet to 5 feet. Whether it's a wing or not, it's still intruding on privacy and sunlight. I live in White Oaks and grew up in the neighborhood. In those days of larger families, had 6 in my family, the current housing stock at that time, single-story ranch homes, is perfectly sufficient to raise a family. We don't need McMansions in White Oaks, Britton Acres, or wherever in this city. It's not necessary. We have a housing crisis in this area. It does nothing to alleviate that. All we're doing is overbuilding and ruining the charm of San Carlos. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up, Mr. Stewart.
My name is John Stewart. I've been an architect here for 36 years. I built my building on Laurel Street in 1987. I'm very involved in this. I wrote a letter with the other 4 architect designers when we got asked to review the comments, and I went to a previous meeting also, and this is the first time I've heard tonight that we're going to be invited back to meet with staff. Nobody's even acknowledged our comments until now, which I'm pretty surprised about. I also was on the committee in 2010 that changed the rules. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Your fault. Thank you.
So I'm not going to really go over the letter that we wrote. I think it's pretty specific. The major things were the house size being 60 to 70% FAR, I think is way too high, and I think we need an FAR. The form-based code, all these models and everything are all on 50 by 120 lots, which really only covers White Oaks and Britton Acres. Nothing west of Alameda or nothing north of San Carlos Avenue or areas like Knoll Drive that are steep. Let's see, I think maybe we need a couple of zoning districts. I know there's some restrictions on hillside properties, but I could see where that might make sense to have something like this for these lots. The garage placement, I think, is a big mistake because people are going to use the garage for storage. They're going to park one car in the driveway and all the other cars are going to be in the street. At least now, if you have a two-car garage and you're using it for storage, you can park two cars in the driveway. And on a sloping lot, how are you going to have your garage halfway back or all the way back when you could be either buried in the hill or over the cliff? So I don't think that works. The lot coverage, I'm in complete agreement. It could go down to 40%, and I don't think it would really have a lot of effect. The existing homes to be remodeled has not been addressed. The setbacks with the, as the other gentleman pointed out, with a 5-foot setback, now it's only 30% of the depth, but with this proposal, it could be the whole depth. You could be 5 feet away.
What is your comment about the remodels? What were you alluding to?
Well, how do we handle situations where the existing house would not fit within these rules?
Grandfather.
I'm just non-conforming, right?
Right, non-conforming.
Yeah.
So how do you handle that? So, sure, my 2 minutes. This privacy thing comes up in every community that I work in. And the best way to do it is with landscaping. So I would almost propose having a first and second story setback of 7.5 or some bigger setback where you could actually put some landscaping in there. 5 feet is really not enough to do anything. So landscaping is kind of the best way. All the photos that they're showing are from Redwood City, I think, where they're all bigger lots. I don't know where those houses are, but I don't think they're in San Carlos. I'd like to see examples of what people think are these egregious houses, and even if they're mine, I don't really care.
Well, a few of them are yours. I know
They're
that.
probably.
So staff, you're directed to find 6 of Mr. Stewart's houses as
I'm sure
examples.
it'd be pretty
He's just giving you permission.
Let's see how the last 7 years have.
I'm doing the 3
treated Mr.
houses where
Stewart.
the church got torn down, and you could use those as examples. I think they look pretty nice myself, but let's see. I'm in favor of not calling it a daylight plane. I think the better word is a building envelope, because really, if you're on the north side, you're going to shade the south side people, but the other 4 sides or 3 sides, you're not really a daylight plane at all. So the wings really are going to drive up cost a lot, because every corner in the building is going to be a lot more expensive. And the last thing, I guess, is what I'm looking at, I don't think is an ordinance. I think it's some kind of diagrams and stuff, and we have enough trouble here trying to figure out what the rules are, and everybody's confused. I've been through this presentation 3 or 4 times, and I think I got it, but I'm not quite sure. But I'd like to see the actual draft of the ordinance written into code. And I guess my last thing is to slow down and don't try to go to the next meeting and approve something and push it onto the planning commission. I have a client here where we're in design, and it takes months to come up with a design that fits all the criteria. And what do we do? Because we don't know what the rules are going to be. There was some talk at the last meeting, or maybe the one before, about a grace period till the end of the year where those of us that are in the middle of a project would be able to finish it and get it submitted. So does anybody have any questions of me? Or?
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Stewart? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Next up, Ms. McClure.
Good evening. I must say that Mr. Stewart took most of my thunder, so, and I won't blame you for the 2011 changes in the code, but not you personally. I just blame the whole process because we went from being. I'm on RDRC. Yeah, I'll let you know that. And I was on it before 2011, and we had some power. We had a 40% coverage instead of 50, and we had certain things that were written in the code, and they went away. So that when you compare it now with what we can do, it's very, very little. And I know that people in the community feel that we rubber stamp things. Well, we don't have anything that we can point to specifically to do anything about it. So I encourage you to take longer, really study it, but write into the ordinances some teeth so that the RDRC can do something about this. But I do not agree with the compatibility that the people are speaking to. I want you to realize that people 60 years ago, I moved to San Carlos 60 years ago. We had different needs, and the young people today want different standards in their houses. And it really isn't our right to take away their right to have a decent design. Maybe it's not a design that you particularly would pick out, but it's one that fits their needs. And I think we have to consider the future use as well as for some of us. I've remodeled my house 8 times. But that's when you're in the construction industry, you tend to take advantage of some of the expertise that you have around you from the men that are working. So I just really, I feel that people have a right to have a second story. I don't think that it's wise to design basements because the bay is coming up, the climate change, I have a friend in the neighborhood that's behind where they're building the railroad track apartments. And she already has water under her house. Well, it's coming up, and it'll come up. It'll come beyond here. I guess there, I'm speaking for Sierra Club, and I'll quit right now.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Mr. Crabb?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I am not speaking for Sierra Club tonight. I usually am, but I am not tonight. I'm speaking for myself. I'm a 29-year resident of San Carlos. I'm also an architect. I had a few things. I have to admit, I have not been following this very closely. I've been more interested in big projects rather than the little ones, but I thought this would be interesting to look at, and I kind of learned a lot of things tonight, and I think the presentation was good. So a couple of things I want to do. Number one, I am not clear how any of this relates to additions to existing houses, which is 90% of the work in the town. If the existing house isn't that core shape, how does this all apply? And I think that really needs to be considered. How many brand new houses are we building in San Carlos? There are some tear downs. There are a few lots. In my neighborhood, there's about 3 lots being built, 2 immediately next to me. So I think we need to look closer at existing additions and how this applies to existing additions. Second thing, I do believe in the need for sunlight, and more so now because of the new requirement from the state of California about solar panels on roofs in 2020. How is that going to affect shading of like single-story houses and so on with 2-story houses? And so I think the daylight plane concept needs to be looked at closely on this. I hadn't thought about it until we talked about it tonight, but that's something to concern. I don't like rear garages. They downplay the car, which I know I love to downplay the car, but they take up a lot of room in the backyard, a lot of room where you can grow plants and trees and feed the animals and work with climate change and all that good stuff, and all we have is the car parked back there, and I don't quite see that makes any sense to me. On the side makes sense if you have a lot wide enough. Let's see other things here. The first people that presented with the peer cities, I was quite fascinated by that, and I quite frankly think that we should put a maximum square footage on the houses in San Carlos. I would say 3,500 to 4,000 square feet. Right now, I have a property right immediately next to me, which was a half acre. They subdivided it in 2 lots. They're building 2 houses, one 3,500 square feet, one 4,000 square feet. I was fortunate enough to be able to negotiate with the contractor and made a deal with him for privacy, and I've come out pretty well with it. But I had a good contractor that I was willing to work with. But who needs a house over 4,000 square feet? It just boggles my mind, and I think it's just ridiculous, and I don't think we need it in San Carlos. We don't have very many in San Carlos, and I don't see why we should have them now. I do believe in 2-story additions. I'm sorry, I'll cut short. I have to.
No, it's that my watch is telling me to breathe. I must be stressed.
Oh, okay. Okay. I think that the people who have single-story houses, to say that you can't build 2-story houses next to them, I think is a problem. I think it's kind of like, I've got it and I don't want the next people to have something. And I just don't like that. But I do think those 2-story houses could be designed so that they try to respect the 1-story houses in some manner, which was setbacks, daylight planes, landscaping. The contractor next to me planted 10 trees along his property line that are going to shade, shelter my property from his house. And we just paid that as a deal. Anything else I got here? One minor little thing, very minor little thing. You have a description for porches, and you're talking, the suggestion is to change from 5 feet to 8 foot wide. I don't see any advantage in that. You're right, if you're going to actually use a front porch, an 8-foot porch is the way to do it. But in the city of San Carlos, how many people use their front porches? What we're doing with the front porches is really using them to scale down the looks of the front of the house, but we're not really using them as front porches. And so a 5-foot front porch, well designed, will work just as well, and that's just adding square footage that you don't need. So I guess I'll wrap up with that. I'm sorry it's kind of scattered. I didn't quite get my act together on this. Thanks.
Fine. You're fine. Ms. Ferreira?
Hi. I am a proponent of everything that has been said by the letter in the architects and by Good Growth San Carlos. I think that the rear setback recommendations need to be supported. I think having the garage in the rear is only good if you have a big lot. I used to live on Orange in San Carlos, and it was when we bought that house, it was a remodel basically from the ground up, and it had a garage in the back, and it was great. It didn't impose on anybody else's property. There were lots of trees back there, and it was a 2-car garage. The lot could handle it. Everything was great. But on the street I live on now, which is Charlton, which is just a very small street, 1 block long, there's no way that any houses on that street, because they're very shallow lots but wider, none of those lots could accommodate anything like that. I do have a 2-car garage there, and no, I have a 1-car garage there, which no car will fit in. And so it's got a 2-car driveway, so we park on the driveway. And I think that's what, as was mentioned many times before, many people do that. And I think that that's fine. But when you make the garages, 1 car, then that's forcing people to park on the street. And as we all know, street parking in San Carlos is extremely limited. My cross street is San Carlos Avenue, and people that live on San Carlos Avenue park on our street and all of the other streets around me, Beverly, Cambridge, Plymouth, because they can't park on San Carlos Avenue because it's become a freeway. Well, not a freeway, but you know what I mean, at commute times. And some of the neighbors, you know, even complain and tell people not to park in front of their houses, which, you know, it's a public street. So then that causes stress and all that. I think that the chart that they showed about the other comparable cities clearly demonstrated, as far as I'm concerned, that the new standards put us up there with the revised new standards, put us up there with only Redwood City. And Redwood City, I don't want to be the same as Redwood City. I mean, just go drive around in Redwood City. It's crazy. I mean, it's so crowded in Redwood City that it takes an hour just to get from basically El Camino to the freeway, or 45 minutes anyway at commute times. We don't want to be like that. It's already getting like that with all the construction that's going on around here. We need to try to, if we're going to build all of these things, then we're going to have to make bigger roads to get to the cars that are coming with all of these bigger houses. And nobody's talking about improving traffic or anything like that. When you build a big, huge house like that, everybody's thinking, well, big, huge house, they're only going to have one kid maybe, or two kids. My neighbors across the street, I love my neighbors dearly. They built a big house, you know, years ago, and it's fine. You know, it's plenty of space all around it, no problem with light or air or anything like that. They have 3 kids, great, wonderful kids. There's 5 cars there. They have a 2-car garage, no cars parking there. You know, everybody loves each other, we all get along, but nonetheless, there's 5 cars parked on the street. So when you build houses that are even bigger than their house, where's going to be 6 or 7 cars? You know, and they either rent out rooms, do their Airbnb or whatever, you know, where are those cars going to go? So I just don't see how making houses, you know, as big as the biggest local community is going to do any good for us. And one thing I will say, though, is the one thing I complained about in one of the first meetings was that the notification process about these meetings was not that great. And I will say that the notification process about that you guys, or I guess it was you guys did, for this meeting was fabulous. I got a postcard, I got emails, I got all kinds of communication, which I noticed you put some in here, and I want to really commend you guys about getting the notification out on these meetings. It's really been fabulous. And I do agree with everybody else that said this. We do need a plan for remodeling existing homes, and I think that a lot more could be done to improve this plan. I think that the wings idea is a good idea, but I think, as I understand it, the wings don't count in the FAR, right?
There isn't a FAR, but the wings don't count. So basically, there's the main body of the house is smaller.
Yeah. So
but the wings, I mean, I won't say they don't count, but they're not part of the main body.
Yeah.
But if you could wrap up your comments, I'd appreciate it.
I will. So I think that there should be a FAR, definitely, and I think that the wings should be included in the FAR. And I appreciate you spending all this time on this, and I really hope that you don't rush this thing through, because I think it still has a lot more work to be done on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Karomis? All right, well, you're generous. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to thank everyone who's worked on these efforts. I know it can be challenging because there are a lot of different interests at stake. I think generally I've heard a lot of different comments, and my feeling is we need to be careful not to play the role of big brother or mother and father to other people. There are different generations in San Carlos. We have older, younger with different interests and desires, and there are a lot of different things that play into that. So we shouldn't be quick to judge other people's goals with their projects. So because nobody will ever agree on those types of standards, my focus is on the proposed standards and my main position, which is I think we need to slow it down more. When I read the proposed standards, what I see is ambiguity on a lot of different points, and that's concerning to me as far as rushing into approving anything. And perhaps I'm missing something in the course of planning speak, but being an attorney and reviewing these standards, I come out of it thinking, I'm not sure on a bunch of different things. To begin with, I'm not sure what this applies to. Does this apply only to new construction, or does it apply to remodels? Does this apply in a way where it could kick something that would have been a remodel into being new construction, for example, to satisfy the garage requirements? Inquiring minds want to know. I cannot answer that question reading the standards. Also, when would this go into force and effect? A lot of us have spent many, many thousands of dollars over the course of many, many months, especially trying to get a hold of our architects who are so busy and trying to figure out what our plans look like.
If you want Mr. Stewart to answer your calls, just let us know. We'll tell Mr. Stewart to answer your calls.
And now we must move faster than ever. But my concern is that there are a lot of people investing a lot of money, and they need to understand what this impact is. And hopefully, whatever comes out of this, there is an understanding that we address people who are mid-process and give some sort of grace period for that so that people can get their plans in. The other thing is, when I read the proposed standards, again, I don't understand how this would apply to a hill lot. I live in the hills. I cannot comprehend how this garage proposal would work there. I really cannot, short of having some sort of levitating garage in the back or having a very odd frontal proposal for the front facade. So I would encourage either a staggered rollout where we apply this to flat lots first and see how it goes, or again, just overall take our time and really think through all the different considerations and irregular lot shapes. On the garage proposal, again, hill lots, I don't understand how that would work. I have a concern on safety as well. A lot of people have talked about the fact that the very foreseeable likelihood here is more cars in the streets. So not only do I find that to be completely unsightly, but I find it to be unsafe, especially for children. I'm one of those families with 3 children. Yes, that's right. And my kids are playing not only where we're located, but at other friends' homes. You see a lot of cars parked all over the streets. A kid runs out after a ball, another car's coming down the street, and they don't see the child. So we need to think beyond just the aesthetics, that the problem that would create, but also safety concerns and what that leads to for our community. The wings, again, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but from what I've seen, I'm failing to understand how that's preserving the charm of San Carlos. And I will conclude there. Thank you, everyone, for all your hard work.
Thank you. Al, is there a way for staff to respond in like a minute or two to the question about how the proposed standards would affect remodels versus new construction? Or is that a longer conversation?
You want to try it?
So, and I'll ask Lisa to sort of help me out, but what we've discussed is that the thresholds for where existing non-conforming properties would trigger needing to come into conformance would remain the same. So if certain degrees of additions would still be allowable, given existing, and it has to do with how much can be demolished or what percentage of new construction, correct, Lisa?
Yes, and I would agree. I think that's obviously a common question that we heard tonight, and I think if we had some sort of diagram to show, so like we had diagrams to show how the proposed changes would have affect the construction of an entirely new house, what would it do to a house that is existing and that wanted to expand. So maybe one of the things that we can bring back to the commission is a diagram to convey that. But getting back to what Stefan just pointed out, where we would start, we would do an evaluation of the existing home and jot down where some of the nonconformities exist. But just like we have in our code today, if there's an existing house that has any nonconformity, we impose the current standards upon that, where they're able to achieve those. And where they're not able to achieve those, of course, you can't allow additional expansion of a non-conforming component of an existing house. And although that seems like a mouthful, I think if we had a diagram to sort of explain how that would work, I think that would go a long way towards kind of showing the committee how that would work in a couple of different scenarios.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Mikowitz, Did I do that right?
No, that's okay.
Will you correct me?
I will.
All right.
It's Mickiewicz.
Oh my gosh,
I
I
know.
absolutely butchered that.
That's
I'm
okay.
so sorry.
Everyone does.
Wow.
I'm a relative newcomer to San Carlos. I've only lived here since 1989. And I live over by Burton Park. I have to say, first of all, I appreciate the presentation. This obviously represents a great deal of work. I work for the government. I work for the state of California. And I know what it takes to produce a report like that. But Stefan, you need to learn to speak English. I mean, absolutely no offense to you, but there ought to be a way to define whatever that was, plane, not light plane, window plane, whatever that was. I mean, I couldn't understand what you said even after you tried to explain it because you explained it in more zoning-ese. And I think that if you're going to present a report like this to the public, it needs to be presented in a way that we can understand the terms being used or they need to be defined. Anyway, I do this all the time. I have to go out and speak to the public about very technical things, and it's a skill, and it should be put to use here. I attended the public meeting at the library. I actually appreciated the presentation there, Stefan, and I got that there is a tension between the desire that some people have to live in houses that are bigger than post-World War II, 1,400 square foot bungalows, and those who want to maintain the historical character of this town, which I've lived in, as I said, for many years. I get that there is that tension, and that is what this project is trying to address. At the same time, I heard Christian speak at that meeting, and then I saw the presentation tonight, and I was astounded when I found out there is no maximum house size in San Carlos. I think that's insane. There should be a maximum house size. The lots are small. We shouldn't put massive houses on these lots. I'm not opposed to two-story houses, even though I'm in a not only a one-story house, but a one-story house that has like an 8-foot ceiling, and it's a Eichler. That is, it's like an Eichler, but it's not an Eichler, so it has an overhang. So we don't get a lot of light as it is. So, you know, the loss of light and privacy is an issue. A two-story house went up next to us, and where I used to look at sky, I now look at that house, just like in the picture there. I'm really here to talk about one thing in particular, which no one else has mentioned, and that is, and I brought this up at the public meeting, and you, Mr. Savay, how do you say your name? I don't mean to be rude. Savay. You made an assertion at that meeting that everybody gets notified about a project if it's within 150 feet of where they live. That is not true. There are only two ways you get notified about a project going up next to you. One, you have a standing request with the planning department, and which I now have. Two, the project goes to hearing. If it doesn't go to hearing and it doesn't and you don't have a standing request, you don't get notified. So when your neighbor across the fence who came to your house and asked you to help pay to build that fence that needed to be rebuilt, then decides to put an addition on his house, doesn't feel compelled to come and tell you about it until the earth-moving equipment shows up in the backyard. Same thing with the other guy on the other side who decided to put a second story on the house. Oh, and by the way, it was a second story, but we still weren't notified by the city that it was going to go up. The city doesn't notify you unless it goes to hearing. In my opinion, that needs to change. Neighbors should always be notified when the second story is going up next to them. It just should happen automatically. Neighbors are not going to tell their neighbors that they're putting a second story up because they know the neighbors will be pissed off. Okay? So I don't understand why that doesn't happen. It should happen. I've spoken to the city council about this. I've written emails to the city council. I've spoken to Lisa about it. Nothing has changed. I just one other thing I want to say, and that is, I don't know why this never comes up, but bigger houses have higher property values. Higher property values means higher property taxes. So the more bigger houses this town has, the more property taxes the city gets. Okay, so that's fine, but there are other factors to be considered besides more property tax revenue. Thanks very much.
I have a question for staff, real quick.
Sure.
Just staff.
Thank you.
So she mentioned about the notifications. Do we do notifications on remodels at the RDRC level or at the staff level?
Yes, So I'll answer your question. Both, there was two questions I think in there. So it is correct. Anything that goes to hearing gets noticed, and there are certain thresholds that are built into our current code that could essentially result in a proposal to do a second story that don't, and the overall square footage of that addition of a second story combined with the existing house doesn't trigger an RDRC hearing. That can happen. And so Mrs. I'm sorry, I can't remember how to, Miskevich is correct. So, in the second part of your question,
that was basically
that was basically it. So that is correct. Those are how our current standards sort of kind of fold into the review process. And so when projects are reviewed at the staff level, while we encourage the applicants, or when we encourage applicants for every project to reach out to their neighbors, there isn't a venue to sort of take in those public comments the way there is at a typical RDRC hearing.
So playing the part of a neighbor, I could see where that would be upsetting for that to happen, right? So are there plans to make changes to that policy? I think we've talked about this before,
and that's
right?
a very easy change that we can do, and we're definitely looking into that, and also expanding the notification
I thought we
radius
talked
in
about
general.
that before.
Yes.
Okay, so that's part of what we've already discussed, and it's in the works?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. DeMatte?
I know you're volunteers, but the decisions you make sometimes affect the living styles and life of the people that you affect. My house was next door to a large lot that was subdivided in 2015, and 2 wedding-style houses were built next door to me. Now, this house next door to me, I see when I look out my dining room window is the wall is 10 feet away from me. It's 2 stories. And I've noticed the past now, since this 2015, I noticed my house has lost light, and also my heating bills are going up. So because of this, I'm losing some of the heat that I used to have naturally. And also, it's disturbed my family, that my wife moved away. She now lives in San Jose, and I live here. And so this has affected me personally. So when you are volunteers, you make these decisions, sometimes it's not about the figures and numbers that you're quoting, but it's about the lifestyle that you're affecting. These houses are 50% coverage of the lot, so they are it all was after 2011 when there was 40%. Also, I would suggest one other thing. My wife's pretty upset too with all the building going on, and I know this doesn't fit in with the program today, but I would suggest that there be some sort of restraint on building permits or limit of them, because within the 2-block radius of my house, I've counted 6 homes that are being rebuilt, enlarged, or demolished. My neighborhood is becoming a construction zone, making it difficult for me to get home even by car. In fact, going through town, I had to go around 2 or 3 detours lately. The debris boxes, the cement, the lumber, and contractor trucks are blocking our streets, and it's making life miserable for many of us. And I know it doesn't fit in figures, but it's lifestyle. And I'm afraid that you're taking away from the lifestyle that was San Carlos, and I've lived here for 40 years. So I can tell you, I've noticed the last few years, things are going downhill as far as parking, congestion on the streets. In fact, a couple years ago, actually a little over a year ago, I was hit by somebody trying to beat the red light on Britton Avenue, and I was just trying to make a left turn, and I didn't see him, but he came out of the blue. And people are, driving very crazily because they're trying to get through our streets. And I noticed even St. Francis Way, a lot of people in my neighborhood, in White Oak area, are not very happy about all the, calming, they call it traffic calming techniques that they're putting on the street. And in fact, some of them even interfere with fire trucks. So anyway, I've been here a long time, and I haven't seen, I've seen things going downhill, not ahead. So I'm sorry, but I have a bad report here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Daniels?
Mr. Chairman, Commission, staff, thank you for holding these hearings and providing this information. I'm a 6-year homeowner and resident here in San Carlos and a 35-year resident in the Bay Area. I also have about almost 2 million square feet of projects that I have developed in 8 states and have done planning and design in hundreds and hundreds of municipalities. I'm here to try to balance the rights of homeowners to their properties with the desire to have responsible building going on here. I think some of the other speakers have mentioned that the need and use of houses from the 1930s and 1950s when these homes were initially built has changed a lot. And I think we have to allow property owners to work within a set of guidelines to build homes that they want to have. So I do strongly disagree with the single car garage approach for the same reason that others have mentioned. I think it'll cause a lot of problems. I also found a lot of contradiction in the suggestions of trying to put parking in the rear of a building, because at the same time there was a desire to use the rear yard or decrease the setback in the rear yard. I think that's problematic. And I think it's overreaching for us to tell people how many garages they should put in the front purely out of an aesthetic. I think it's only going to encourage more cars parking in the driveway. I vehemently disagree about the main body concept. I think it is grossly flawed and heavy-handed because it's going to force very restrictive, expensive design. It creates a lot of circulation issues. Anytime you create crosses and wings in buildings, you now have to create hallways to feed those, and it becomes a very inefficient use of the building. So I think we're going to actually not only encourage the second story, but we're going to encourage people to even more maximize the homes. And I think we've gained very little. I disagree about I don't find the same objection to the so-called wedding cake style or the double car garage. I think we could address that by putting aesthetic requirements on what a garage should look like and how it could be massed and made to look more like the front of the house or the facade of the house rather than restricting that kind of parking. I do think that having built and designed and planned homes in many, many different municipalities in this area, I think we're being too liberal about what we're allowing to build. I'm a responsible builder, and the homes are exceeding what should be built on the lots. So within reason, I'd like to see is an open area to build within, a building envelope that we could use that has some level of restriction on it for both FAR and lot coverage. I think we need to address both of those and keep it within some responsible limit. So I'm looking for a balance between the two, and I hope the commission will do that too and reject the current proposal. Thank you.
The last speaker I have is Ms. Timby.
Sarah Timby. I too am unhappy with the size of the houses, and while I appreciate the aesthetics that went into the thinking of this, I don't think it's going to satisfy the size. My main question, though, is I thought the Planning Commission was going to be changing soon, and because of that, I'm a little worried. Well, for two reasons. I'm worried that you're going to push something through just to get it done. and I don't think that should be done. And I would also like an answer, if I can ask for it, on if that is true, that the Planning Commission will be changing, and how it will be and when.
I would happily answer that question for you.
You were going to answer it, I was going to answer it.
I happily answer it. Yes, the Planning Commission is going to change dramatically in about a month when 3 of us, Jesse, myself, and Angela, will be termed out. And 3 additional folks will be appointed. Let me assure you, there is nothing I would rather do than kick this can down the road past the time that I'm on the commission. If there is a rationale to do that, you do not need to be concerned about us making a decision solely in order to do it before we get off. Trust me.
You just said you'd rather not.
As much as we'd like to do that.
Yeah.
As much I'd rather kick the can down the road.
I see that as a problem, and I'm bringing it up because I really don't think it should be pushed through right now. I mean, there's a lot of people here have already said this really is not going to satisfy.
I hear you, but just in the counter argument, and I don't know what's going to happen, but the counter argument is, and this is what I'm concerned about, is that if we don't do something, then the things that people are complaining about are going to remain the same. So that's why when I asked Christian, do you see this as an improvement? Because if it's an improvement, we can make incremental improvement and then continue to make improvement in the future. The other issue, of course, is that when you do get a brand new planning commission, and it won't be brand new, there'll be 2 folks who are still here. I mean, you lose the knowledge of the folks who actually were involved at the time that all of these issues came about. But again, no one's gonna push anything through. It's either ready or it's not. If it's not ready, we'll give it more time.
I definitely get the impression from today's talks that it's not ready.
Yeah, I hear you. Definitely the people here believe that it's not ready. That's true.
Thank you.
Yep. Mr. Houskin?
So there's been a lot of much better comments said already that than I can say. So
I think you could do fine.
I think I'll keep this relatively short. First of all, I appreciate all the work. I met with Alsave almost 2 years ago now. It's been a lot of work. It's a good first start. I think you just said it very well, that the sentiments here are that there needs to be more time. I want to say it's a huge job. I wish I knew what all the answers were, and I would just lay them all out for you. So I don't have the answers. I'm a San Carlos resident for 19 years. We live on Carmelita Drive. This is not about me. Our house is a lost cause. We have a neighbor on one side, has a very high house. We love our neighbors. We bought into it that way. So I'm not here because I have a complaint or because I'm going to do a construction. It's just an important topic to me. And so I've taken some time to try to really understand it. I do want to bring up one point. I hate to make too much of a big deal out of it, but the shack that had 7 members, 4 of the members were supposed to be regular homeowners. I heard that there was a lot of care went into it. Of course, it's a very long process. 3 of the members were sort of experts, realtor, architect, builder. A simple Google search shows that one of the homeowners, supposed homeowners, is also a vice president of a building company. So maybe all these people are experts. I don't know them. Maybe they're here. And maybe they're builders and architects with a conscience. But it just seems like, well, there's a step right there in the process that somehow went wrong, I guess. I don't know exactly how they explain that. But again, I don't know the people. Maybe it's all okay. But I think just my general sentiment, and you've been hearing it yourself, I don't have to tell you this. If you step back, I've seen that presentation twice. It's a very interesting concept. I'm understanding it better now. Apparently, I'm not the only one that struggles to try to understand how it all works out. And then with these other lots in San Carlos up in the hills, you have all these special cases. I think if you just stand back, sort of take the 30,000-foot view, it's clear that there's still more time that needs to be put into this process, and also maybe actually pushing back some more on the requirements. And again, if I knew all the answers to this, I would tell you. But it's clear that it needs more time, and that there's a lot of sentiment against at those where it comes out still at this level. And it's been a lot of work. It's a lot of great work that's gone into it, but more work needs to be done. So that's all.
Thank you. So that's all the speaker slips I have. Was there anyone who wished to speak that hasn't had an opportunity to? And I keep pressing the beep button. That's not a good thing. All right. Was there anyone else who wanted to have an opportunity to speak who hasn't? If you want to come on up, and if you're willing to introduce yourself, that would be nice.
My name's Lisa Wellman. I'm a designer in San Carlos. Been involved in many of the meetings, was at the original Sign the Form with the other architects in town. My main concern, well, you know my concerns because they're in the meeting, in the letter that we sent in. The one thing that we haven't seen is a floor plan. You know, I think a really helpful tool would be to have the front line, the 5 or whoever, you know, tell us or tell the consultant what are the goals of our clients, you know, what are those goals as far as their homes and how they live, and really put together some non-forms, like let's get inside the home, because it's not all about just what it looks like. Our clients have to live in these homes, they have to work for their families, and that's one of the things we haven't seen. There's some really, you know, general forms from the exterior, but it would be really helpful.
From a design functionality standpoint.
Yeah, and we know what our clients are asking for. And it may not be that they need or want these large homes, but there are some general purpose planning design that we see in 90% of our clients. And I don't see those fitting into what's proposed today. And that's all. We just haven't seen that. And maybe we're going to see that at our next meeting, but we haven't yet. That's all.
Thank you. Was there anyone else? Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Gurmeet. I've been living here for 3 years now. This is great work. I like the presentation. I think we should not make the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? So they will, no matter what proposal you put in, no matter how much research you put in, no matter how many experts you hire, there will be a bunch of people who will like it, and there will be a bunch of people who will not like it. That's a fact of life, right? So I like your approach. Like make this change and iterate over it and get it. If something else comes better, we do that too. If we keep waiting on to get the best proposal out there, it's going to take you 6 months, a year to get this out, then another 6 months, a year of grace period to get this out. You're looking at 2020 when the first house will be built with this. So my request to everybody here would be, yes, there are some changes which not everybody is happy about or they're not clear about, but there are some changes which is great. So whatever you want to do, let's iterate this a little bit sooner. This process started in 2016. We are looking at 2018 May right now, and by the looks of it, we won't be implementing another year or two. If you build, say, 10, 12 houses a year, there are at least 4 neighbors around it, so 40 neighbors every year, which will be not happy with what's going on. So there is some value to take an action, and there's some value to move forward and iterate on things that don't work. And we can definitely have an iterative process and say, hey, we tried these things. These 4 things don't work. Let's try go back to drawing board. These 3 things work. Let's keep them intact. Things like there has been a big discussion on garages. Look about a remodel. Most people want 300, 500 square feet more in their homes. Having a smaller garage gives you an impetus not to go up, right? Going up is 4 times more expensive than going backwards. And extending a wing, like somebody was mentioning, is expensive to have a wing. And a wing is expensive than a flat surface, but a wing is a lot cheaper than going up. So there are pros and cons to all these approaches, and I think we should weigh them in and not look for the perfect proposal to come through. No city has a perfect proposal for any of these solutions. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Was there anyone else who hasn't had an opportunity to speak who'd like to speak? All right, seeing none, what's the pleasure of staff at this point? Did you want to work with the models some more? Did you want to present any more? Do you want us to provide comments now?
Yes, we'd like you to provide some comments. We heard a lot tonight, and we have some ideas in terms of what to bring back to the